I got a midnight text from my friend's mother. Come outside alone. Fearful face, I thought it was a mistake, until I saw her standing there in the dark, waiting like she already knew I would come. It was one of those nights where time feels stuck. My room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of my phone screen, and the rest of the world outside my window looked completely asleep. No movement, no sound, just that heavy silence that makes your thoughts feel louder than they should be. I had been scrolling aimlessly for almost an hour, half distracted, half lost in my own head. Nothing unusual, just another ordinary night after an ordinary day. Then my phone vibrated. A single notification lit up the screen. At first, I didn't even react. Most midnight messages are just random forwards or group notifications you ignore without thinking. But when I saw the name, something inside me shifted immediately. It was my friend's mother. For a moment, I just stared at the screen. Not because it was confusing, but because it was wrong. Not in a bad way, but in a way that didn't fit anything I knew about her. She was always composed, respectful, careful with distance. The kind of person who would greet you warmly during daytime visits, offer tea politely, and then return to her world without leaving any emotional trace behind. And now, she was texting me at midnight. I unlocked the message slowly, almost like I was afraid it might change something just by being read. Only 5 words appeared on the screen. Come outside alone. That was it. No explanation. No context. No tone to guide me. Just a sentence hanging there like a door left slightly open. My first instinct was logic. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe she meant to text someone else. Maybe her phone had slipped, or she had confused numbers. I even checked the contact again, just to be sure I wasn't imagining it. But the name was clear, and still there. I sat up in bed, suddenly more awake than I had been all day. The silence of my room felt heavier now, as if it had changed shape around me. My thoughts started filling in gaps that weren't there, concern, confusion, curiosity, all mixing together in a way I couldn't separate. Why would she text me? Why outside? Why alone? And most importantly, why now? I could feel my heartbeat more than I could hear anything else. It wasn't fear exactly. It was uncertainty wrapped in something I couldn't name yet. I glanced toward my window. The street outside was dark, still, untouched by movement. Even the faint streetlight flickered like it was tired. For a few seconds, I didn't move. I just held the phone in my hand, watching the message, waiting for it to make sense on its own. But it didn't. If anything, it became more real the longer I stared at it. And then something unexpected happened. I started getting dressed. Slowly, without fully deciding why. Not because I understood the message, but because a part of me already knew this night wasn't going to stay ordinary anymore. The moment I opened the front door, the world outside felt like a different reality. The cool night air rushed in first, light, sharp, and almost startling against the warmth I had been sitting in. It touched my face immediately, pulling me out of my thoughts and placing me directly into the silence of the street. Everything was still. No passing cars, no voices, just the faint hum of distant electricity and the soft rustle of leaves that barely moved. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, but waiting. I stepped out fully, letting the door close behind me with a soft click that felt louder than it should have. And then I saw her. She was standing near the edge of the small gate, just beneath the weak glow of a streetlight that flickered occasionally, like it wasn't sure whether to stay awake. Her shawl was wrapped gently around her shoulders, its fabric catching small shifts of wind. She wasn't moving much, just standing there, as if she had been waiting longer than she admitted. My steps slowed without me realizing it. There was something different about her tonight, not in a dramatic way, not something obvious, but subtle, like a person seen outside their usual setting, where every small detail becomes more visible. The confidence she carried during daytime visits felt softer now, less structured, more human. As I approached, she looked up. Our eyes met, and for a second, neither of us spoke. That silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was uncertain. Like two people standing at the edge of a conversation neither of them had planned to have. Then she lowered her gaze slightly, breaking the stillness first. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, her voice calm, but carrying a trace of hesitation. I shouldn't have texted you like this. Hearing her voice in this setting felt different. It wasn't the polite tone I was used to during brief daytime greetings. It was softer now, unguarded in a way that made the night feel even more personal. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I looked around instinctively, as if expecting someone else to appear and explain what was happening. But there was no one. Just the street, the dim light, and her standing there in front of me like a question I hadn't learned how to answer yet. She paused, adjusting the edge of her shawl slightly. Her fingers lingered there for a moment, as if grounding herself. I needed to step outside. I couldn't stay inside anymore. The honesty in her words caught me off guard. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't planned. It was just real. I nodded slowly, still trying to understand the situation without making it heavier than it already felt. Is everything okay? I asked carefully. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked toward the empty street, as if searching for words in the distance. The flickering light above us cast faint shadows across her face, changing the way she looked depending on the second. Finally, she spoke. "Nothing is wrong," she said softly. Then after a pause, almost quieter, and maybe that's the problem, that sentence lingered in the air between us. For a moment, neither of us moved. The night didn't feel scary anymore. It felt suspended, like something fragile had begun without asking permission. And I realized then, this wasn't just a message I had responded to. This was the beginning of something neither of us had fully understood yet. We started walking without really deciding to. It wasn't planned, and there was no clear direction, just a natural movement away from the gate into the quiet street where the night felt even more open. The streetlights stretched long shadows across the road, and every step we took seemed to echo slightly longer than the last, like the world was paying attention to something it didn't fully understand. At first, neither of us spoke. The silence between us wasn't empty anymore. It had weight now, like something had been said already, even if nothing had been spoken aloud. She kept a slow pace beside me, her shawl gently shifting with each step. Occasionally, she adjusted it around her shoulders, a small gesture that felt less about comfort and more about holding herself together. I glanced at her once or twice, but she mostly looked forward, as if choosing her words carefully before letting them exist. After a while, she exhaled softly. "I didn't call you because something happened," she said finally, her voice low, almost blending into the night air. "Nothing dramatic, I mean." I nodded slightly, listening without interrupting. She continued after a pause. "It's just, nights like this feel heavier sometimes." Her words slowed as she spoke, like each one was placed carefully rather than rushed. There was something in her tone that didn't ask for answers. It only wanted to be heard. "My house gets too quiet," she admitted. "And when it's quiet like that, everything you usually ignore comes back." I didn't respond immediately. I could hear what she wasn't saying more than what she was. We walked past a dim corner where the light barely reached, and for a moment, her face was almost hidden in shadow. Then we stepped back in the glow again, and I noticed how calm she looked on the surface, even though her words carried something deeper underneath. "My son is away," she added after a while, her voice tightening just slightly on the word son, as if it carried more than just distance. "In the house, it feels larger than it should." There was a pause after that, not uncomfortable, but full, like she had finally placed something heavy outside of herself, even if just for a moment. I looked ahead, trying to choose my response carefully. "So you couldn't sleep?" I asked gently. She gave a faint nod. "I tried," she said, "but sleep doesn't always come when you ask for it." A small, almost tired smile crossed her face, but it didn't last long. "I kept thinking I should talk to someone," she continued. "But then I realized I didn't really have anyone I felt like disturbing at this hour." Her gaze shifted briefly toward me. "And then I thought of you." That sentence made my steps slow slightly. Not because it was shocking, but because of how simple it was. As if I was the most natural answer to a problem I didn't know existed. We walked a little further, the distance between us steady, respectful, but no longer as distant as it had been when we first stepped outside. "I'm sorry if this feels strange," she said after a moment, softer now. "It probably does." I shook my head gently. "It's okay," I replied, and I meant it, because in that moment, I wasn't thinking about what was appropriate or unusual. I was only thinking about how someone who looked so composed during the day could sound so quietly human at night. And for the first time, I understood this wasn't about message. It was about loneliness finding a voice it didn't usually use. We found a small bench near the corner of the street where the light was softer, almost gentle. It wasn't an intentional choice. It just happened as if both of us naturally slowed down at the same moment, agreeing without words that walking wasn't necessary anymore. The bench sat under a weak streetlight that flickered every few seconds, casting shifting shadows around us. The night felt quieter here, but not empty. More like it was holding its breath, listening. She sat first, carefully smoothing her shawl as she lowered herself onto the bench. I sat beside her, leaving a respectful distance between us, not out of discomfort, but habit. The kind of distance people keep when they don't yet understand the shape of a moment. For a while, neither of us spoke. But this silence was different. Earlier, it had felt uncertain. Now it felt shared. She tilted her head slightly back, looking up at the dim sky. The wind moved lightly through the trees behind us, and she adjusted a strand of hair that had slipped loose near her cheek. That small gesture felt strangely intimate in the quietness of the night. Not in a romantic sense yet, but in the way human moments become visible when everything else fades. "I don't usually come out like this at night," she said suddenly, breaking the silence. Her voice was calmer now, less burdened than before. "I mean, I don't usually talk to anyone like this either." I nodded slowly. "It's okay," I replied. "You don't have to explain everything." She glanced at me briefly, and for a second, there was something softer in her expression. Relief, maybe, or the comfort of not being judged. "I think I've spent too many years being okay," she said quietly. "You know, the kind of okay where no one asks questions because you never show cracks." Her hands rested loosely in her lap, fingers gently intertwined. Every now and then, she would loosen them and then fold them again, like she was unconsciously managing emotions she wasn't used to expressing. I listened carefully, not interrupting. "There are days," she continued, her voice lower now, "when you realize you've gotten very good at being needed, but not very good at being understood." That sentence stayed between us for a moment. The street behind us was still empty. A distant dog barked once. Then silence returned again, as if even sound didn't want to disturb what she was saying. I noticed how the light touched her face differently when she turned slightly toward me. It softened her features in a way I hadn't seen before. Not just beauty, but something deeper. Something lived in. Like time had shaped her carefully, not harshly. "You're listening very quietly," she said after a pause, a faint hint of curiosity in her tone. I gave a small smile. "I think you needed quiet more than answers," I replied. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked at me for a moment longer than before. Not intense, not heavy, just present, like she was noticing something she hadn't expected to notice. Then, unexpectedly, she gave a small, almost tired laugh. "I didn't think I would end up talking like this tonight," she admitted. "With someone like you, sitting here and just listening." Her words weren't flirtatious. They were honest in a way that made the moment feel more grounded. A gentle breeze passed between us, and I instinctively shifted slightly closer. Not too close, just enough to block the wind from reaching her directly. It wasn't a conscious romantic gesture. It was instinct, but she noticed. Her eyes softened briefly as she adjusted her shawl again, this time without rushing. And in that quiet moment, something subtle changed. Not a confession, not a line crossed. Just a shared understanding beginning to form in the space between two people who had started the night as strangers in emotion and were slowly becoming something more difficult to define. The night had changed its shape by now. It wasn't as sharp or uncertain as it was when we first stepped outside. It had softened, like time itself had slowed down just enough for us to breathe inside it properly. The street was still empty, but it no longer felt lonely. It felt contained, like the world had politely stepped back and left us a small space to exist within. We stayed on the bench, not because we had decided to, but because neither of us felt the need to move. She adjusted her shawl again, pulling it slightly closer around her shoulders as a cool breeze passed through. This time, I didn't think, I just subtly shifted my position so I was blocking part of the wind from her side. It was a small movement, almost automatic, but I felt her notice it. She didn't say anything at first. She just looked down for a moment, as if registering the quiet care in that gesture. Then she continued speaking, her voice calmer now, more open than before. You know, she said softly, it's strange how you can live in a house full of memories and still feel like you're sitting in an empty room. Her fingers rested loosely on her lap, no longer tightly folded. There was less tension in her posture now, as if speaking had slowly loosened something inside her. I nodded slightly. Sometimes it's not the space, I said gently. It's who you can share it with. She glanced at me briefly at that, not responding immediately. Her eyes lingered just a second longer than usual before she looked away again, toward the quiet street ahead. The silence returned, but it wasn't heavy anymore. It was warm. At one point, she let out a slow breath, the kind people take when they've been holding thoughts for too long without realizing it. Her shoulders relaxed slightly as she leaned back against the bench. I think I forgot what it feels like, she admitted quietly, to talk without needing to be strong all the time. That sentence carried something deeper than sadness. It was exhaustion, but not the kind that comes from a single day. The kind that builds over years. I didn't rush to respond. I just let the moment stay as it was. A few seconds passed. Then she turned her head slightly toward me again, this time with a more thoughtful expression. Her eyes weren't distant anymore. They were present, aware, attentive in a different way. You're easy to sit with, she said simply. Not dramatic, not emotional, just a truth spoken softly into the air between us. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond to that. So I just nodded again, feeling something subtle settle in my chest. Not excitement, not confusion, but awareness. Awareness that this wasn't just a conversation anymore. The distance between us hadn't physically changed, but it didn't feel the same. The space felt smaller. Not because we moved closer, but because comfort had started filling it. She shifted slightly, and her hand rested for a moment on the edge of the bench near mine. It wasn't intentional, or at least it didn't feel like it was. Just a natural placement as she adjusted her posture. But for a brief second, the closeness of that small detail became noticeable. Neither of us acknowledged it. And, somehow, that made it more real. A passing breeze moved through again, and this time she didn't adjust her shawl immediately. Instead, she stayed still for a moment, as if she had grown comfortable enough not to react instantly anymore. I realized then that trust wasn't something she had declared. It was something she had started allowing, not in words, but in pauses, in silence, in the way she no longer felt the need to hold everything so tightly in front of me. And in that quiet understanding, something unspoken began to settle between us. Gentle, invisible, but undeniably present. The shift didn't come suddenly. It crept in quietly, like a change in temperature you only notice after it has already settled in the air. We were still sitting on the bench, still under the same flickering streetlight, still in the same quiet street. But something inside the moment had begun to tighten again, slowly replacing warmth with awareness. It started when she stopped speaking. Not abruptly, but gradually. Her last sentence had faded into silence, and instead of continuing, she simply stayed still. Her hands, which had been relaxed moments earlier, now rested more carefully in her lap again. I noticed her gaze drift toward the road ahead. Not focused anymore, just thoughtful. Distant in a way that wasn't about the street, but about something beyond it. A passing car appeared at the end of the road, its headlights cutting through the darkness for a brief moment. The lights swept across us as it moved closer, and for an instant, everything between us felt exposed, like the night itself had been interrupted. She adjusted her shawl again, but this time the motion felt more deliberate, controlled. I shouldn't be out like this, she said quietly, almost as if speaking to herself rather than to me. There was no panic in her voice, just realization. I didn't respond immediately. I could feel the meaning behind her words before she even explained them. The car passed, and the street returned to its silence. But the atmosphere didn't return with it. Instead, it had changed shape again, this time more serious, more grounded. She exhaled slowly. "This is not something I usually do," she continued. Her voice was steady, but there was a careful distance in it now. "Talking like this, sitting here, at this hour." Her fingers pressed lightly together in her lap, as if she was recentering herself. Then she turned slightly toward me. And for the first time since we sat down, there was something measured in her expression, not emotional openness, but awareness. Of consequences, of boundaries, of everything that existed outside this bench. "I have responsibilities," she said gently. "A life that doesn't really allow misunderstandings." The word misunderstandings hung in the air longer than the rest. Not heavy like guilt, but heavy like clarity. I understood what she wasn't directly saying. This wasn't just about the night anymore. It was about what the night could become if it continued without awareness. I nodded slowly. "I understand," I said quietly. And I did, because nothing we had shared was wrong, but it also wasn't simple. The silence returned again, but this time it felt more structured. Like both of us were now standing carefully on opposite sides of an invisible line we hadn't noticed earlier. She looked down for a moment, then gently adjusted the edge of her shawl one more time. This time, it wasn't for comfort or warmth. It was composure. "I'm glad you came," she said after a pause, her voice softer again, but now more grounded. "Really?" She looked at me briefly, and there was sincerity there, not confusion, not hesitation, just quiet gratitude. Then she added, almost carefully, "This shouldn't become complicated." That sentence didn't feel like rejection. It felt like awareness catching up to emotion. I didn't argue. I didn't try to change it. I just nodded again, because there are moments where understanding matters more than direction. She stood slowly after that, smoothing her shawl with a calm, practiced motion. The emotional looseness from earlier had gently folded back into structure. But something had changed. We weren't the same people who had walked here. Not because something had been broken, but because something had been seen clearly enough to be respected. We didn't speak much on the way back. The walk felt different now, slower, more intentional. Not because anything was heavy between us, but because everything had already been said in the only way it could be said tonight. Quietly, without rushing, without forcing meaning into places where it didn't fully belong yet. The street was still empty, but the sky had begun to change. That faint pre-dawn glow, barely noticeable at first, was starting to spread across the horizon. The darkness wasn't gone, but it was no longer absolute. It felt like the night was slowly loosening its grip on the world. She walked slightly ahead now, just a step or two, as if naturally returning to her usual composure. Her shawl was wrapped neatly again, her posture steady, her movements calm. The version of her from earlier, the one who had spoken with quiet vulnerability, still existed, but she had gently folded it back inside herself. At her gate, she stopped. I stopped a moment after her. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. The silence here felt final in a different way. Not uncomfortable, not uncertain, just complete. Like a sentence that had reached its natural end. She looked at the gate, then briefly down at her hands, and finally up at me. The first light of morning touched the edge of her face softly, revealing details the night had hidden. She didn't look lost anymore. She didn't look heavy. She just looked present. "I didn't expect to talk so much tonight," she said quietly, almost with a faint, tired smile. I gave a small nod. "Neither did I." That brought a soft pause between us again. But this time, the pause wasn't searching for meaning. It already had it. She adjusted her shawl one final time, not out of nervousness, but habit returning. Then she stood still, as if choosing her words carefully one last time. "I just needed to feel like I wasn't alone," she said gently. Her voice was steadier now, but there was still something honest underneath it, something unhidden. Then she looked at me directly. "And you made that feel true." There was no exaggeration in her tone, no emotional intensity pushing it forward. Just a simple acknowledgement of what had happened between two people in a quiet night. I didn't know what to say to that, so I simply nodded. Sometimes gratitude doesn't need response. just recognition. She turned slightly toward the gate, placing her hand lightly on it, but didn't open it immediately. There was a brief pause, one of those rare moments where departure doesn't feel like leaving, but like closing something carefully. Then she glanced back once more. Her expression was calm now, balanced, the kind of calm that doesn't erase emotion, but organizes it. "Take care," she said softly. Not distant, not formal, just human. I nodded again. "You too." And that was it. She opened the gate and stepped inside slowly, disappearing into the space that belonged to her life, her responsibilities, her reality. The gate closed with a soft sound that felt more final in memory than in volume. I stood there for a moment longer than I needed to. The morning light had fully begun to arrive now, touching the street, the walls, the edges of everything that had been hidden a few hours earlier. The night didn't feel like it had ended dramatically. It felt like it had resolved itself. I turned away slowly and began walking back down the street. Each step felt lighter, but not because something had been gained or lost. It was lighter because something had been understood. Not spoken, not defined, just understood enough to remain where it belonged. And as I walked into the soft morning light, I realized something simple. Some moments don't change your life by continuing. They change it by ending quietly at exactly the right time.